Hello Year 12, welcome to your next lesson on the cognitive approach. Well done for your hard work from last lesson. I've been really impressed with the notes that I've seen, so definitely keep up the good work. You're doing really well. So today we're going to be looking at the evaluation for the cognitive approach to consumer behaviour, which we looked at last lesson. So for the starter, I want to think back on what we talked about last lesson in terms of schema for consumer behaviour. So we spoke about how we have schemas for basically everything that's around us, and this includes products that are advertised to us as consumers. And to get an idea of how product schemas work, I want you to think of a product that you're really familiar with. It might be your favourite chocolate bar, it could be your favourite perfume, it could be your favourite car, whatever product you're really, really familiar with. Just think about that. And number one is to make a list of words which you associate with this product. And this list will represent your product schema. So just pause me now and make the list. So you might have included in your list things that you've seen on this particular product's advertisement, or you might have included a tagline or a word that's constantly repeated. Number two, I want you to outline an advert for your product based on your schema. So for example, I thought about dairy milk chocolate as a product that I'm familiar with. And for the list of words that I associate with this product, I would have put things like half a glass of milk. I would have put the colour purple because that's associated with Cadbury's. And then for this one, when I think of an advert, I think of three really famous ones. One is the eyebrow one, the other one is the gorilla playing the drums, and the third one is of the guy who's in the office, and there's a really catchy song on, and he's just like dancing around in his office. And that those, even though they're from years ago, they've really stuck in my brain. So try and think of an advert for your product. And then number three, I want you to think, what would be the advantage of making an advert schema incongruent? Schema incongruent is something that we spoke about last lesson, and it's when advertising companies present a product in a bit of a wacky way. So the example that I gave is for comparison websites. For example, Compare the Meerkat has presented a comparison website in a very wacky and different way, and that makes the product way more easily accessible. And because it doesn't fit in with our current schema, it stands out more and it makes us access that product more than we normally would. And it's the same for the adverts that I've explained with the Cadbury's. A gorilla playing a drum set isn't typical of words that you relate to chocolate. So therefore it's more likely to stick in your brain. So what would be an advantage of making an advert schema congruent? I want you to write just a brief sentence to answer that question. Okay, again recapping on last lesson, how does cognitive priming relate to consumer behaviour? And there's three things that you might talk about here. So I want you to pause me now and think back. If you need to, look back at your notes and answer the question, how does cognitive priming relate to consumer behaviour? So we spoke about how in advertising it's all about context, and I told you about the Ford advert as an example. The Ford advert doesn't start with the brand, it doesn't start with even showing you a car. It starts with showing you people playing basketball, people snowboarding, people skateboarding. And when you see that context again, for example playing basketball, you're more likely to access that product more easily because of the context. So that's one way that cognitive priming relates to consumer behaviour. The second one is the subliminal messages. Subliminal messages are cognitive priming below level of awareness. So we're not aware that products are being advertised to us. For example, the F1 car that was advertising the Marlboro, the cigarette brand, and also the Absolute vodka ice cubes, also in the advert. And then we've got brainwashing, which can be the repetition of words, the images, colours, sounds, or appealing to emotion. So I talked to you about the McDonald's theme tune and the John Lewis adverts, which appeal to our emotions. And that's a form of brainwashing that advertisers use in order to make it more likely that we're going to buy those products. There's 4 evaluations that I want to talk to you about. And the first one is that the supporting research for cognitive priming. So it's obviously a strength, and it comes from this piece of evidence done by Adrian North. So basically what he did is he asked 4 groups of people to taste and describe wine as background music plays. So it was independent groups. Each group had a different type of music playing. So one group heard music that was powerful and heavy. One group heard one that was subtle and refined. The third group was zingy and refreshing. And the fourth was mellow and soft. And what they found is that the descriptions given by the participants tended to match the characteristics of the music, even though they all tasted the same wine. So this support priming as a key influence on memory, because the music had primed them to taste the wine differently. However, a weakness is that the effects of subliminal messages are weak. So what these researchers found during a visual detection task, so basically participants had to do a visual detection task on a computer screen, and while they were doing this, they were subliminally primed with the word Powerade flashing on the screens, but it was below the level of awareness, so they weren't aware that this word was flashing on their screens. Later, the participants were asked to select a drink from a shelf, and compared to a control group, participants were more likely to select Powerade, but only if they were already thirsty. So subliminal messages only work under certain conditions, because this effect disappeared altogether when a 15-minute delay between the prime and selection was introduced. So if the participants waited 15 minutes from when they had done the visual detection task to when they had been asked to select a drink from the vending machine or the shelf, that effect didn't exist. So it wasn't more likely that the experimental group were more likely to choose Powerade over the control group. So these findings suggest that priming effects through subliminal messages have little or no effect on behaviour, even in very limited circumstances. Another problem is with the fact that research into priming is not often replicated. So most studies do not support the view that priming has a significant effect on consumer behaviour. Some studies do show a positive effect, but the fact that there's a contradiction in these findings shows that there's a lack of replication. Replication is very, very important for scientific research. In order for something to be scientific, it needs to be replicable. If it's replicable, it means that another researcher has taken your study, done the same thing or very similar thing, and has found consistent results, which means that your data is reliable, and therefore the conclusions that you've drawn about human behaviour are also reliable. So what I want you to do is I want you to look on page 56 of your textbook and look at what James Vicari did. And so just summarise it into 3 brief bullet points and then tell me why that shows a lack of replication. So James Vicari did his study, his research on cinema goers. So while cinema goers were watching the adverts before the film, what he would do is he would flash up on the screen the words popcorn and Coca-Cola, but he did it so fast that the cinema goers weren't aware of these words, so it was subliminal messages. And basically he claimed that popcorn and Coca-Cola sales increased significantly, but then no one else was actually able to replicate this finding using the same strategy. Anyway, it came out that he'd completely fabricated all of his research. He'd completely made it up. So maybe that explains why he couldn't replicate it. But this undermines the claims about the value of priming in consumer behaviour, because maybe subliminal advertising isn't actually as effective as we once thought. And the last one that I want to talk to you about is ethical issues with with using the cognitive approach to explain consumer behaviour. There are ethical issues in these advertising techniques that we've talked about. For instance, the use of subliminal messages in advertising is unethical because consumers are by definition unaware they exist. Like, for example, the F1 racing car that had the Marlboro advertised onto it, or the Absolute Vodka ice cubes. The viewers were completely unaware that they were being advertised this product. This is one reason why direct subliminal advertising is banned in most countries. The use of cognitive priming is perhaps less obviously unethical, but it could be interpreted as a form of deception, because you're basically being lied to when you are brainwashed, or they use subliminal advertising against you. This means that psychologists should think very carefully about their professional involvement with techniques deliberately designed to manipulate consumers' perception of a product, because consumers should be able to choose for themselves what they buy and what they use. So for your last task, what I want you to do is I want you to draw the four pictures summarising the 4 evaluation points that we have spoken about today. This will be a really useful technique to have in the exam, because when you're asked to evaluate something, you're asked to evaluate cognitive priming or subliminal messages, for example, used in advertising, then you can just think back to the pictures and they'll help you remember the research. So have a go. The first 3 will be a little bit easier than the 4th, I feel. Ethical issues you might have to get a little bit creative with, but I'm excited to see what you come up with. Post your notes onto Teams, please. Don't email me, because then it shows up as not submitted. So submit it onto Teams. Any questions, as always, let me know, and I'll speak to you soon.